And we're off. Hi, everyone. How are you? Welcome, welcome, welcome on this wonderful day, the 20th of November, 2025, for episode 279 of my live chat. My name is Luke Thomas. Thank you so much for joining me. I greatly appreciate it. Let's see. On the docket today, we're still living in the shadow of UFC 322. I had a video up yesterday kind of talking about it, and it turned out to be both really right and also really wrong at the same time, which is weird. Yeah, we can talk about that, but we can talk about UFC 322 more broadly. We still have events this weekend. They're all over the Middle East, it appears. Saudi Arabia is going to play host to David Benavidez taking on Anthony Yarde, as well as Brian Norman and Devin Haney. Bam Rodriguez on that card as well. UFC Qatar is on the docket as well. That is Dan Hooker versus Arman Tsarukyan. That is as well Ian Gary taking on Belal Muhammad. One of the Topuria brothers is back. Like, there's a whole lot happening on that card, so we can get to any of that. Plus, Dana having some beef with Francis Ngannou. We can get to that as well. So a lot of fun stuff to get to here. Thumbs up if you're watching, if you'd be so kind. We'll talk about this a little bit later in the show, but big thanks to our friends at Toiletries. Toiletries is having right now, there's a link in the description box below, and of course, they're the sponsor of all live content on this channel. They're having a Black Friday sale. This will be for your scrubbers. This will be for your shower organizers. This will be for your trimmers. This will be for blades. You name it. Anything in the grooming department that's going to help you look good, they've got it. And right now, 25% off. 25% off on everything that Toiletries has. Go get it, boys and girls, right now. There it is. All right, without further ado, you all know the score. Let's get this party started. There is just never enough time in the day. Never enough time in the day. It is insane. All right. Here's how this works. I put up a thread on the posts section here at youtube.com/Luke Thomas. You guys fill it up. We'll go for an hour on all of those questions. And then at the end of that, we'll have the paid portion where you can put in a donation into the super chat. You're certainly under no obligation to do that, but it goes a long way if you'd be so inclined. And then if the only way to get around that would be to be a member, in which case you can contribute without having to pay. All right? All right. Very good. I owe you guys, so again, just 1,000 things I'm behind on, but I owe you guys and I have it actually here, but how to get started, like sort of reading philosophy and like free places to go to like kind of get your feet wet. I actually put together a list. I have it for you. We'll do that at the end of the program. All right. All right. Let me get a sip of this fruit punch. Let's get the show on the road. All right. Boom. We'll do it this way. Yep, and I'll put it up a little bit so y'all can read. Okay, here we go. Am I the only one who's not really interested in Islam versus Ilia anymore? At least not right now. Ilia still has Patty, winner of Arman Hooker, Gaethje, etc. to fight, and Islam has a slew of contenders at 70. I would love to see them both go on separate runs for at least the next year or so, and then we can revisit the fight later on when they've cleared out their respective divisions. Well, I would agree largely with this. I definitely feel like after Islam performed so well at welterweight against Jack, there's going to be a lot of people who have this kind of a feeling for a couple of reasons. One, as you indicated, now that Islam has made himself the man at 170, having him go up against the potential contenders there, whether it's Ian Gary, whether it's Shavkat Rakhmonov, whether it's Kamaru Usman, there's a enormous value to seeing any and potentially all of those. As you also indicate, on the Ilia side at 55, there's just, if Tsarukyan wins this weekend, there's that. Hooker potentially as well. Gaethje kind of waiting in the wings. The big fight with Patty is kind of a showdown that we all probably want to see. So on just that level alone, it doesn't make sense for them to necessarily cross-pollinate. More to the point, because of, as I indicated, the way Islam looked, what is the argument for putting that fight at 70 other than to maintain the cleanliness of the divisions, right? In other words, we don't have to ask Islam to go back to 55. If he wins there, he's not going to defend it at 55 any longer. So yes, in that sense, you have to put it at 70 because even if Ilia loses, it doesn't necessarily matter. He can go back to 55, which is really the best weight class for him. 70 is, you know, an enormous stretch. So it doesn't make a ton of sense right now at the present moment. There was a window to make it that it makes a lot less sense today. But the problem with that is it's still basically number one versus number two in the pound for pound rankings facing off. It's two of the bigger stars in this division, so certainly on the Islam side. Islam has turned out to be quite the figure. And I think there might be enough promotional pressure to at least keep the heat on this fight. The other portion is, I mean, just how much longer is Islam going to do this? Okay, did he look great at 170 pounds at 34 years of age? Yes, but these Dagestani guys, man, these super elite ones, they just don't strike me as the kind of guys that are just going to hang around, you know, late into their 30s, kind of collecting checks, fighting on fight nights after the glory days are over. And I'm not begrudging the ones of the kind of fighters who go down that path. That's an understandable path for any number of reasons, competitive, financial, and everything in between. I just don't think that's what's going to happen to Islam, who obviously has his own endorsement deals outside of MMA, who, you know, relative to other MMA fighters makes a pretty good return in terms of his paychecks. So for all of these reasons, it just seems a lot less likely now than it did maybe just a couple of weeks ago. I suppose on some level, I still want to see it. It'd be an interesting thing to do. And at 55, it made a ton of sense, but there was a window to make that. And I don't know if it's fully closed, but it's 80% closed at least. And also, if they did fight at 70, here's just a basic question. I'm sorry, I just don't see that as very competitive. At 55, when Islam is weight drained and he has to really mind his P's and Q's about his offensive output, and there are questions about his durability because of the sacrifice he has to make to go down to that weight class, that to me kind of evens it out. But if Islam is at, like, you know, full health at 170, and now Ilia is having to put on weight that is not really normal for him, or at least walk around in a way that, you know, doesn't, there's something to be said for a little bit of the monastic life required to make weight and what that does for combat sports performance. Removing that factor, I don't know. I mean, again, do I think Ilia can knock him out? I think we probably all think that he can probably knock out people up to 70, maybe a little bit beyond that, but certainly up to 70. But even then, it's not really known. And there are just so many ways you would imagine Islam can cause problems for him at 70. So amazing. A fight that was the most coveted can all of a sudden go from being that to now being like, well, does this even make sense anymore? The MMA world moves fast. Hey, Luke, is JDM's first title defense having to be against pound-for-pound king Islam one of the toughest first title defenses in UFC history? There's simply no question. I think we talked about this last week. Here are some other hard ones. Shogun against John. But John was just a number one contender at that point. He had no belts, right? I mean, I realize in retrospect it means more, but Eddie against Connor. Yeah, that's a bad one. You know, Connor at his absolute freaking peak. Good luck with that. Verdum against Stipe. See, that one's a little different for me. Go back and watch that fight. Verdum fought terribly in that contest. He got hit with a shot that wasn't even necessarily... Yeah, Stipe was a very good, elite fighter in his day. This is not a question about that. It's a question of, like, what resources did Stipe have to call upon to win this contest? Islam had to call upon a fair bit, even though he dominated in the end. There was a lot of preparation, obviously, that went into it, of course, but in terms of minding his P's and Q's through the execution of it, this is the part where it's like, okay, I can appreciate the skill, but I don't find it entertaining. Fine, but let's go back to the first part of that sentence, appreciating the skill, the level of, like, the kinds of T crossing and I dotting that Islam had to do in order to maintain the positions that he wanted to achieve offensive sequences that he was looking to get going, this required an enormous amount of very specialized, properly executed over time skill. That's really not the challenge that Stipe had. Not at all. Verdum chased him, not cage cutting, but if you go and watch, along the fence line. And I remember watching that fight in real time being like, what are you doing? And sure enough, he gets popped completely over pursuing with the worst cage tactics you've ever seen. I'm not saying that that fully represented the overall threat throughout the course of his career that Verdum offered. Verdum is the best submission heavyweight by a million miles in the history of MMA, even over guys like Frank Mir. But he fought terribly in that fight. So that to me doesn't quite count. And then DJ against Benavidez. No, that would not. No, that would not. That would not. That's not the same level. That's a tough fight. Certainly, it's a respectable win, but I wouldn't put that on even remotely the same level as what it means to fight Islam. No. Dude, Islam is real good. Real good. Like, shockingly good. This is the part that kind of kills me about Saturday. I'm seeing a lot, and there's a lot of people. I've seen, you know what I've noticed? A lot of Instagram reels of people making fun of hardcore MMA fans, right? So it'll be somebody doing a sketch where it'll be like him talking, or him or her, or usually I've seen a him, where they'll be imitating someone who's like a casual fan who's kind of tuned in, than a hardcore fan. And they're mocking the hardcore fan for being like, don't you think this is entertaining? Don't you think this is good? First of all, I do think it's entertaining. But okay, I don't expect everyone to. That's fine. And in fact, the argument against Islam would be, if your understanding of the fight game and the skills and the tactics and the strategies that go into it has to be really, really high in order to appreciate somebody like this, that's going to create a problem as a mass market product. If you have to deliver product to the masses, but simultaneously it requires them to have a very, very high level of aptitude about what they're watching. And again, I'm not saying I'm some kind of fucking genius. That's really not my point. I've just been doing this for a long time. You could be as dumb as a rock, and if you've been doing it as long as I have, you'll pick up stuff along the way. Call it experience, anything else. But you have to have that time spent picking up on stuff over year after year after year after year till finally you're like, okay, I can piece together some of this. If that's the barrier to entry, that's a pretty significant barrier to entry. I can appreciate that, but the problem that kind of I really have with it all is like, you're losing out on something here. This is not any old fighter. This is not any old fight. This is the number one guy in the sport who's, oh my God, like his level of skill is outrageous. It's outrageous. I made this video yesterday and I thought I was losing my mind because there was an argument to be made. It was like, is Islam, there's two arguments to be made. One was, is the Islam fight against JDM similar to the Khamzat fight against DDP? I just soundly reject the comparison. There's something to be said for it, perhaps a little bit. Again, certainly if you're a very, very casual fan, which by the way is the biggest portion of fans in MMA, but as a general rule, the two don't compare. Khamzat had his positional way with DDP and then refused to do anything about it that was anything even remotely risk averse in terms of really pursuing the fight in any kind of final sense. He would move to crucifix, and then he has no real meaningful ground and pound from there. Would just kind of hang out, or he'd get the back, put his hands together, and he wouldn't release the grip so he could keep locked hands, so he could keep returning DDP to the mat. He would immediately pass the mount of the back. Right? He would have essentially completely wide and pass guard, no problem, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm watching this video of Islam, and he is clearly attempting, I've had this verified, I didn't just rely on my own vision. I sent it to a couple of other like high-level black belts that I know, and I was like, is it my imagination, or is this dude trying to actively pass guard here? And in fact, he does at the end of the third. He does pass it in the third. He tried a couple times before. So he's actively passing, but then someone hit me to this interview. No, sorry. Well, yes. Someone hit me to an interview that Khabib did, where they talk about they didn't want to pass guard. They wanted to stay in half guard. And then Craig kind of confirmed it, and that was a problem that they had in trying to get the octopus guard going. The octopus guard, it's interesting, right? Because there's some interesting trade-offs you can make. The 4 positions from which you could try would be full, half. You can kind of consider knee shield to be a separate one, and then side control. Side control makes it very, very difficult to do it unless you're really high level, because it's easy to step over the back leg to get to the back, right? It's one of the problems from that position. You have to keep your knee high up against their ribs so they don't just step over the back. But the difference is that it allows you to belly out. And that was what they were looking for. They wanted JDM to belly out. What ended up happening was, and I'll make a video about this more formally, what I think ended up happening was, and again, this is partly me piecing together what I've been told and also what the tape shows, he had a confused game plan. Not the one that his coaches came up with, the one he was dealing in real time. There was the game plan that they had, which was they wanted to belly out, 2 hands on one, get to turtle, and then fight the fight from there. And then there was the one that he ended up just kind of using, I think, out of habit, which was there were times he was actively seeking regarding attempts, particularly in rounds 3 and 4. You can literally watch him actively regard. That was not the plan. I don't think that was the plan. I don't think that's what they were trying to do, because they were trying to get to a scenario where they could belly out. And you can't really do that if you're from half guard. Why? Because if you actually notice in the Craig Jones instructional Just Stand Up, he talks about one of the things that is really dominant for a top half guard player. They'll Turk the bottom leg, and that prevents the bottom player from bellying out. And you'll notice Islam at times is Turking that bottom leg, but at other times he's threatening the pass. I think he was threatening the pass to force JDM to kind of go back to his instincts and regard, to keep him in that position, make him work underneath, set up, the potentially the arm triangle Kimura series that he, or head and arm triangle Kimura series that he kind of goes back and plays there with. So you had JDM on the one hand trying to get to this game plan where he's trying to go 2-on-1 belly out and the bottom leg is not trapped. And then other times he's actively regarding. And the whole thing was just kind of confused. You saw the coach, Ben Vickers, tell Submission Radio the game plan wasn't the problem. And I know people are killing him for it. They might be right, actually, because there is a confused application of an idea here that just doesn't make sense. Half the time it's one thing, or I should say 60% of the time, 65% of the time, it's one thing. And then the rest of the time, it's kind of another, especially the longer the fight goes. So it's this really confused thing that was happening. I wasn't aware of it when I made the video, and then they showed it to me, and I'm like, well, but like, look at what he's doing. And the guys I showed to, like, yes, he is clearly trying to pass here, or at least threatening the pass to get a reaction from JDM. But something's not clicking here, because if you're going to be doing octopus guard the way he's trying to do it, particularly from Z guard, it requires having that bottom leg free. The bottom leg's got to be free. And then there's times he's actively trying to scoot it under. And then again, there's also times Islam is just holding it, Turking it, and not allowing it, and then getting past that knee shield or that Z guard to kind of cover the space. Islam and his team, man, they strategically had a fucking brilliant game plan. And, obviously a lot of top control wrestler guys, they're going to be dominant from there. They're going to be totally dominant from these top. Randy Couture was big on doing this kind of thing 20 years ago. Obviously this is a more modern, updated version of it, but that's kind of my read on the fight, is that I don't know if JDM was injured. We all saw him, like grimacing really hard. I don't know if the threat of everything that happened to him underneath made him kind of go back to bad habits. But it looked to me like they had one idea about what they wanted to do, and they got part of it, but they went back, or at least JDM went back to bad old habits and had this confused game plan that just didn't cohere. And you're just not going to beat Islam that way. I mean, you're barely going to beat him even with the right game plan properly executed, much less a confused, kind of self-contradictory one, All right. It's really not what you asked, but that was my read. So that's why I took it down, because I was like, if you just look at it and you didn't know these statements, like it looks clear what he's doing. And again, the whole thing's kind of confused. But then I was like, well, what? How can that be the strategy if he's actively regarding underneath? And it's because I think the game plan got away from him. I think the game plan completely got away from him. Hey, Luke, Islam is one of the only people in UFC history to beat reigning champions across 3 weight divisions. The undisputed 145 champ, undisputed 55 champ, and undisputed 170 champ, all in their absolute primes, all ranked top 7 on the pound for pound list, with Volk and Charles being top 3, all being on double-digit winning streaks, and Volk and Jack are undefeated for nearly 10 years prior. He has the most lightweight title defenses ever. He is a 2-weight world champion. He's the second person to achieve 16 consecutive wins in the UFC in the modern era, so the quality of the wins is elite as well. He submitted the most decorated submission artist in UFC history and knocked out one of the best strikers in UFC history. I say all this to ask, where does Islam Makhachev place on your all-time GOAT list? And where does he rank among the best, most skilled fighters you've ever seen? Let's go with the second part first. Where does Islam rank on one of the most skilled fighters I've ever seen? He's got to be top 5, maybe top 3. He's so insanely good. As I mentioned, he doesn't quite have the same Hulk smash style on the ground that Khabib does. It's a little bit less than that. But as I've indicated before, overall, he makes hardly any mistakes. And then the way in which he makes up for it with vastly superior stand-up to Khabib is an extraordinary, historic combination. His level on the ground is one of the highest I've ever seen in MMA. His level on the feet is not necessarily one of the highest I've ever seen in MMA, but in that tandem that he's got where he can now touch people up on the feet, hurt them, legitimately hurt them, which you saw him do up here at 70, and then the rest of what he can do. And look at the variety of takedowns he has. He had a trap dump. He's got inside-outside trips. He's got sasais. He's got head-inside singles, high crotches, doubles. I mean, there's just no. He's got Harai Goshis, Uchimaras. He can fight on the fence. He can take you down off the fence. He's got excellent scrambling. He's got ridiculous anticipation in grappling where he knows where the opponent wants to go. He's good about setting offensive dilemmas. If you go to this, I'm going to either pass guard or submit with this one. If you go to this, I'm going to pass position or submit from this one. You have to kind of pick, and he's very, very good about doing that. He is excellent from the back. He is excellent on top. As I mentioned, he makes virtually no mistakes. At 70, it appeared he had a very, very good gas tank. He doesn't get hit very much, dude. They just don't come much better than this, ever. Not now or at any time. St. Pierre, to me, a little bit more potent on the feet. Might be just as good on the ground, somewhere around that. I mean, I think they're pretty commensurate on the ground, but I think he's slightly better on the feet. I might put him ahead. Guys like Jose Aldo had certain things they were much better at, but then, he wasn't exactly like a ground operator, so you don't really get a chance to know offensively what he can do there. John Jones, the best light heavyweight I've ever seen. Certainly in his prime, he could do a lot as well, although the longer his career went, the more it actually became stand-up affairs, although, he obviously had some groundwork too. But just in terms of, to the point you raised, the quality of opposition he beat and the diversity of skills he used to beat them and the time in which he beat them, this is one of the most special guys in MMA history. Guys, I've been watching MMA since the fucking 90s. Doesn't make my opinion automatically for that reason, law or something. But I'm just telling you, I've been around a long time. They don't come like this hardly ever. Hardly ever. Again, they might have a lot. They might be well-rounded, but then they've got a certain kind of way that they have to win fights. Islam can win fights in virtually any kind of way. He's a ground and pound threat when he wants to be. He's a submission threat when he wants to be. He's good at creating offensive dilemmas. He has tight position, grappling anticipation. I mean, he's a race car. He's a race car. That's kind of what he is. He's very, 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 very elite. And I'd put him somewhere top 3, probably top 3 in terms of just overall skill. Now, in terms of racking up the most meaningful wins, those are slightly different considerations. But in terms of just overall skilled, he's got to be top 3. I mean, worst top 5. Yeah. Given that Jack had Volk in his camp, who fought and prepared for Islam, and had one of the best grapplers in the world, Craig Jones, helping him prepare, and he still couldn't do anything, who can beat Islam? The strikers in the division are unlikely to prepare for Islam as well as Jack did, and so will most likely get taken down and subbed. And the grapplers in the division all have worse striking than Islam, who proved his competency on the feet by outboxing Poirier, outstriking Volk, dropping Charles, and completely obliterating Jack's calf. He is one of the most well-rounded fighters I've seen, And I just don't see a world where he loses anytime soon at 170. To the point you raise, I'm not exactly sure who's his threat at 170. Now, Rakhmonov remains an interesting contender, but he remains a very unknown contender. He looked really good. He certainly beat Ian Gary, and I think that win carries some value, even though at the end everyone was kind of like, oh, right, but Rakhmonov's not who we thought he was. He apparently had some kind of injury that he was dealing with at that time. I know a lot of guys are. I think his was a little bit more serious than normal, but nevertheless, if you enter these fights, you enter them, and the expectation is, you thought you could win. So he thought he could win the fight. He did, but, everyone kind of knows the score. We really haven't seen him since. There's a lot of promise with him, but there's a lot of questions about it. And more to the point, if a guy like Ian Gary can get your back, motherfucking Islam is going to get your back. I mean, all respect to Ian Gary. He's well-rounded. He's skilled. I'm not saying he's some chump. I'm just saying Islam's better than him. And if Gary can have your back and threaten that choke, Islam's going to finish that, right? I mean, one of the big issues with Ian Gary I've had is he'll get to a pretty dominant position, and he'll get there pretty quickly, and that'll actually be very, very impressive. And he can hold it, but his finishing mechanics on submissions is poor, especially for this level. You constantly see him struggling with getting to a spot, locking something up, and then it's just not quite he doesn't quite have the mechanics that he needs. And some of these things can be very precise details that you drill over time. He needs more time to do it. Islam is not going to allow you. No, you not only does Islam not make hardly any mistakes at all, you're not allowed to make mistakes against him. Mistakes against him are profoundly costly. So there's that. The Kamaru Usman one is kind of interesting, but Kamaru is obviously, I think, the second best welterweight of all time. I respect his career enormously, but he's over the hill. That was a good, nice win he had against Buckley, but that's Buckley and Islam are just two wildly different threats. Leon is out of the picture. Prochas, I think, needs one more, and even then, do we realistically think that? What do you think? You think Islam's going to strike with him? He's going to take him down. He's probably going to get to his back. Sean Brady, not in the conversation at the moment. Belal, I don't know what would happen with that if he were to win. I'm not sure how that would go. And so, you're kind of running out of contenders here all of a sudden. You're like, well, who's going to be that guy? The reality is, again, I think for that reason, you're going to see Islam 2 more times, maybe something like that, another year. And then he might, after that, I don't really know what kind of long-term commitment he'll have to the game. I do want to say, though, that like Jack having Craig Jones in his camp and then Volk and then them having a pretty good insight into what it was required to beat Islam and then kind of showing up and not getting it. There can be a variety of factors that explain that we may not know. Was he overwhelmed by the moment? It could be that. Again, was he carrying some kind of injury that they just don't want to talk about? The grimacing on the ground, to me, like the explanation being pure frustration doesn't really make sense. I'm sure that was absolutely part of it, but like that's the explanation, is that he was frustrated. I don't know. That he looked like he had something going on. But again, they're not the ones saying that. I'm just saying. And then, Islam having some really interesting tactical adjustments that they were not prepared for, threatening the pass, forcing him to get to half guard, then occupying that half guard space, beating the knee shield, right? And then just going to work with that Kimura series that you saw him go to. I just don't know if they were really prepared for the ways in which he could be manipulated. But listen, this is a game that is full of Islam doesn't make a lot. I don't see anyone that's going to beat Islam, but that's not really the point. The point is if you're the guy, you owe the division title opportunities, and you give it to the best guy. And sometimes the minorest, is that a word? The most minor of errors can have profound consequences. Islam might come in there and sick on fight week. Might have a bad weight cut. He might have a rib separated. You know what I mean? There could be some kind of factor. He wasn't as focused as he should have been. He didn't take the opponent as seriously as he should have. Anything like that can trip them up. I don't think these are likely scenarios. I wouldn't pick anyone against him at this point. But like, I've seen people say, like, not so much about Volk, but about Craig, like how good, how useful was his contributions. And my response to that would be, well, I think certainly on the sub defense, there's absolutely no way JDM was going to last without the submission defense drilling that they did in camp. Like, just no way. You cannot last 25 minutes with Islam Makhachev if your submission defense is not very good, right? More to the point, what are Craig's ideas that people think don't work? And why do they think they don't work? Oh, well, he couldn't beat Islam. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking, in the moment in which he is trying them, what about these ideas are bad? And I've really not seen anyone explain that. Why was use of the octopus guard bad? Oh, he couldn't get it going. What were his other options? Do you think a more conventional approach would have worked? Well, you're going to frame, dig an underhook, get the elbow behind you, sit to your butt, and then what? You're going to butterfly fucking guard sweep him? I'm not saying a different coach can't come in, revitalize the camp a little bit. Certainly, I think that they have to rethink this part of the game plan where he's got a high guard and Islam's just shooting right underneath it. The big point about the Belal Muhammad fight with JDM, as we recall, we did tape study on this. Hold on. We did tape study on this on my Substack where we talked about this. From the fight before the Belal fight to the Belal fight with JDM, the biggest difference was he was stopping the takedown at the point of the attack. And that was completely gone in this fight. Again, why did that happen? Again, so I just see a lot of people making claims like, oh, Craig's ideas didn't work. And sure, there is something to be said for, rethinking some of these things, bringing in some different coaches for some different areas of need. But when the coach said like the game plan wasn't the problem was the execution. I can look at the tape in that third round and many of those half guard sequences from about the 2.5 minute mark on down the bottom. And JDM's got a completely confused approach. Half octopus guard, half Z guard, then traditional regarding on half guard underneath to stop the pass. And then Islam passes at the end and he goes to turtle. And it's like, okay, I can see why Islam wanted to stop it, but he literally passes his guard. It just, you know what I mean? Like, it was a very confused mixture. I think trying to throw the baby out with the bathwater on this is a bit of my personal opinion. It's a bit of a mistake. Okay. Oh, Jesus. All right. I'm going to preface this question by saying I have great relationships with the women in my life. And I do not hate women. Okay, fair enough. I believe you. I'll take you at your word. Am I the only one that can't stand Shevchenko fights? I don't like her fights very much either. In recent years, her main game plan has been just to lay on her opponents. She never lands meaningful ground and pound and almost never chases a sub. At least Islam chased the sub, right? Oh, here's your point. At least Islam was looking for subs against Jack. Exactly. Valentina seems content to just lay in guard or half guard, landing pitter-patter shots. I agree. She did this against Weili Grasso twice and attempted to do it against Fiorot, but Fiorot had good takedown defense. On the feet, she visibly hurt Weili to the body multiple times. She did. Why not try following up and chasing a finish? She seems so content just going to decisions, and it's always such a boring fight. This is a great question, and I want to tell you a theory that I have. She's clearly extremely skilled, but I wish she would try to finish her fights more. Do you agree? So, I am so glad you brought this up. I was thinking about this. I lived through the beginning, middle, and end of St. Pierre's career. And if you saw the St. Pierre, he got subbed by Hughes, but it was too much too soon, right? You ever seen the face-off between the first fight between St. Pierre and Matt Hughes? St. Pierre can't even make eye contact with him. He has to look up when they get face-to-face. You know how some guys look down? St. Pierre can't even look at Matt Hughes. He's literally looking up. It's this strange moment. Frank Mir was the commentator. He picked up on it. Frank Mir used to be a great commentator, by the way. But, he was just blasting out like Jay Huron and guys like that. And you would it's early bit of a run. But then eventually he just became really a top guy wrestler. He became takedown, threat at all times. And he would jab your face off if you had to fight Koscheck and stuff like that. But in general, the longer his career went, the more wrestling oriented it went. And you're seeing a lot of similar patterns to that. Now, Islam has kind of always been that way, but at 34, he's in the back end of his career. Obviously, it's still very good, but he doesn't have a ton of time left. I think with Shevchenko, you're looking at something very similar. So there's a pattern that appears to be happening, that as these fighters, these super elite ones who are well-rounded, get older, one of the things that they appear to be picking up on, this is my belief, MMA is wildly chaotic. Wildly chaotic. There are so many variables that you have to account for that are very, very difficult to do, particularly as your timing and your speed and your reflexes deteriorate over the course of time. Not that they're shot at age 35 or 36, but they're not what they were when they were 26, right? That's a pretty fair way to put it. What I think is happening is they're realizing at the end of their careers or close to the end of their careers, I'm going to be in some of the biggest fights I've ever been in, with some of the biggest stakes involved. And I don't quite have the same risk-taking attitude more generally. And I want to just kind of control for these wild variables with a more smothering style of game plan. And that's what they end up doing. One thing the UFC should consider, especially as the fighters get older more broadly, is if you're going to make super fights, try to make them a little bit earlier in a fighter's career. Because it seems to me if you wait until they're mid to late 30s, they're not going to be the same fighter anymore. They might still be good enough to win, and they might be good enough to win even convincingly. Certainly, we would all agree Shevchenko won convincingly, 50-45 on all three judges' scorecards. But that's not the issue. The issue is that it's extremely risk-averse with very little offense. It's full of control, but not much more. It's inherently risk-averse without all the things that you need. My theory is that if you tried that for someone at 29 versus 37, you might get them much more willing to open up offensively. Asking people who are in some of the most important bouts of their career late into their fighting life to fight a little more open, let's say. I don't know if reckless is the word, but open. That's a tough ask. They get hit. St. Pierre was really never the same after Matt Serra flattened him. There were times, of course, he would engage on the feet, but that really became a true turning point for the beginning of him just being like, I'm going to just focus on wrestling. And this was a really big achievement. I remember at the time there was all these Division I wrestlers. St. Pierre was just running them over. And this was oh my God, look what he can do. But, again, it's a way to control variables. If you're flat on your back and I'm in top half guard, there's just a lot fewer things I ever have to worry about. Not only are you not in a position to throw heavy strikes, even some of the ones you could, say a knee to my head, you're not allowed to because we're both down. So you're limited in that sense. You're physically limited because you're flat on your back or at least on your hip. I know which way you're going to turn. Like there's just a lot of things I can control. Giving these people the most important, significant bouts of their career when they're in that stage of their career seems like it's a mismatch of priorities between the athlete and the fans. You got to match him up. I mean, look what Ilia's doing. Ilia started out as a wrestler, and I realize he's a striker now and he can wrestle. I don't know how long he's going to stick around, but I bet if he sticks around long enough, you're going to see him kind of revert. I'm not going to say all the way back to wrestling, but it might become a more prominent portion of his game as he ages. But right now, he's willing to knuckle up. I think they should be thinking a little bit more carefully about what time they start making these fights happen if what they want are people to just go ham, Now, of course, that's not going to be the case with everybody. Look at Poatan. He's age 38, but he's really never been a wrestler. Wrestling to him is the thing you have to do defensively, and he's gotten, pretty good at it, but that's not the way he always thinks. That's not that it came from kickboxing, for crying out loud. He's learning on the job. I think they're giving title shots to athletes who are still elite, but beaten up, shop-worn, risk-averse, and skilled. and you're getting performances like this. Shevchenko's wins are as good as they can possibly be, given who she's fought, basically. Again, the first Amanda Nunes fight, if that one had gone longer than 3 rounds, Shevchenko would have definitely won it. And in their rematch, dude, Amanda Nunes struggled with her. She won, but she struggled. She's skilled. It's not the issue. The issue is they're kind of old and they don't want to fucking just duke it out with these people anymore. Luke, 2-part question. Firstly, I was picking Ian to win against Belal since I found out about the matchup using his footwork and range, and given that it's a 3-rounder. However, I remembered that Belal was able to dominate Wonderboy, who was 2-1 in his last 3, and a 3-rounder who also has great footwork and uses range well. How do you think that fight goes? Okay, that's part one. Secondly, what happens if Belal wins? Does he stay at 70 as a contender? Does he end up fighting Islam? Does he move divisions? Yeah, that part I don't really know. Hold on, let me look up something. Where did he fight Wonder Boy? Where is that? That was at the Apex. That's a smaller cage. This will be a bigger one. I think between that and Gary's quick footwork, it's going to be tough. Belal has a pretty good explosive shot that might make up the difference. I guess we'll have to see. I think that Gary's going to get it done. If Belal wins, he could go to 85. He said he wouldn't fight Islam. We'll see if that's true. That's a question for Belal. I don't know how to answer that one. But on the first one, how do you think that fight goes? Yeah, I think that the bigger cage, I think Ian Gary's probably got the quickest feet in that division. Probably still quicker than Wonder Boy. Wonder Boy's got very good craft, but I don't know how quick his feet are relative to Ian's. Ian's really good that way. I mean, he was faster than, again, he's still kind of old, but nevertheless, he's faster than MVP. He's been faster than I think anyone he's basically ever fought. His takedown defense is very, very good. He's rangy. I think it's a tough fight for Belal. Belal's going to have to get him up against the fence and take him down from there and kind of make him work. And that's pretty tough. Like Ian Gary's, he's got some skills in that department, you know, like him or hate him. He's got some skills in that department. So I think, I don't know what the odds are. What are the odds? Now that I ask, what are the odds? I haven't even looked at them. The odds for our friends at, well, I don't know what DraftKings has, but most places have Gary as a pretty sizable favorite. Anywhere from, dude, BetMGM has him as minus 300. Wow. Yeah, I can kind of get it. I sort of get it. Yeah. Interesting. Look, what do you think was the biggest reason Islam dominated Jack, yet couldn't seem to do the same against Volk and Dustin? Much less dehydration, weight cut at 70, I think, is a critical component. B, genuine improvement over the past few years. Partly that, sure. C, Volk is a different animal, and Dustin's experience dealing with Khabib's grappling and training with Gamrot gave him a major edge. Guys, do you not recall Dustin stopped a bunch of the takedowns? Let's pull that up. So if we look at Dustin Poirier's record, 30-10. Dude, Dustin Poirier is fucking good, man. Like, oh, he never won a weight class title. Okay. You see who he fought? I mean, he wasn't fighting chumps. So Islam attempted 16 takedowns on Poirier. He only got 5 of them. Brothers and sisters, Dustin Poirier is fucking awesome. He's real good. That's a big part of it. He made Islam duke it out on the feet. And then you add in that he's a heavy-handed striker. You add in, you know, any number of other factors there. Like that, you know, dude, Islam, remember Islam, he got kneed in the face, I think, in the 5th round, and his whole shit was bleeding when he got that sub. Dude, Poirier's a motherfucker, man. Like, dude, Poirier had to fight in the time of Khabib and Islam. Like, good luck, man. Like, it's gonna, you know what I mean? You had to fight at two of the best guys who ever did it in this weight class. You had to live through their era. And one was on the feet, basically. I mean, obviously the ending was on the ground for the Islam fight, but, you know, a lot of that was contested on the feet. And then, you know, on the ground versus almost completely versus Khabib. It's tough, dude. It's tough. But Dustin Poirier is, I mean, I'm glad people are, you know, people, of course, I'm always respected him, but I'm saying people are taking a new look at him being like, damn, he actually did way better than some of these other donks. Yeah, dude. I mean, it's the era in which he came up in was one of the most difficult eras to win a 45 or 55 pound belt. It's just insanely difficult. And he beat the shit out of a lot of really good fighters. Everyone is talking about Islam entering GOAT talks, but no one is mentioning Javier Mendez having a solid case for being the greatest MMA coach. DC, second best light heavyweight ever, 2-division champ. Islam, best lightweight ever, or certainly one of them. Oh yeah, well yeah, no, I think he is, but okay, 2 division champ. Khabib lightweight champ, and then if not the best one, the second best one. Kane heavyweight champ. Luke Rockhold middleweight champ. Usman PFL and Bellator champ, and you're not even considering Josh Thompson Strikeforce champ. He also came out of that gym, so add him to the roster as well, and many other top contenders and elite fighters. Do you have him as your GOAT coach, or is he at least in the discussion? How could he not be? How could he not be? How could he not be? Which is kind of funny because it's like you look around at AKA and you're like, who else from? I mean, is AKA even like a thing anymore as like a relevant force, or as like a even as like a brick and mortar place that people are just coming and going? I don't really know what the state of it is anymore. But in terms of what he built with the original AKA and what it meant to have, Luke Rockhold and DC and Josh Thompson and as you indicated, Cain Velasquez come through. Just that is pretty incredible. Then he develops this relationship. Now, how much does he deserve credit for making Khabib what he is? How much does he deserve credit for making Islam what he is? There's a lot that goes into Abdul Manap and what he did. And, I think that limits the amount of credit that Javier can take from those things. However, even if you take off Islam and Khabib from the list and Usman, he's still got, how many coaches have developed that? Think about this. How many coaches have ever developed a UFC champion? It's actually not very many, right? Because in the history of MMA coaching, 1% of 1% ever do it. And he's gotten this many. It's absurd. It's absurd. He has an understanding both of like technically what people need, what kind of environments they need to succeed in, but also like there's a mentorship he seems to provide. And I think perhaps most importantly, he's got him and Crazy Bob Cook have an incredible eye for talent. I don't know if Bob Cook is working with Javier and still in any capacity, but back in the original AKA days. And by the way, 2 guys who never had titles who were at AKA, Josh Koscheck and John Fitch. Why didn't they have titles? Because they grew up in the era of St. Pierre. But, but for the best welterweight ever, one of them 2 absolutely would have had the title by that point. So even for guys who didn't get the belt at AKA, but, come from that gym, look at how good they were. And then also add in the fact that that's where Dave Camarillo came from, who's one of the first guys ever to blend jiu-jitsu and judo. He called it guerrilla jiu-jitsu. Guerrilla as in like the FARC, guerrilla jiu-jitsu. Dude, like an absolute, you can see why Scott Coker tried to put Strikeforce originally as like a San Jose based promotion. Look at the talent. Now ATT kind of serves like this, and it's like this recruitment hub, but this was still in the days when MMA was very, very regional. Look at the level of recruitment that they were able to do, talent identification, talent development, other kinds of alliances they're able to make to burnish their name and develop these fighters. It's Javier easily stands apart of literally every other MMA coach ever. Now, there are some very, very good ones, especially on the guys who might have skills that he didn't, and they were better. Guys who are better at technical advice. John Danaher, in terms of what he did for jiu-jitsu, his ability to develop ideas about how to advance fighting. I don't know if Javier's doing that exactly. And by the way, don't forget, Javier was a decorated kickboxer before he ever got into coaching. There's a whole him. Oh, and by the way, I'm also not even counting Frank Shamrock. Frank Shamrock came from AKA in the early days. Like, just dude, that gym is fucking insane in terms of what it has produced. One of the most important factories of the most preeminent talent the fight game has ever seen. So, does Javier Mendez deserve credit? People want to give credit to coaches who are a little bit more Danaher-like, guys that develop champions, but like a mad scientist, and they have all these ideas. It's not exactly clear if Javier's doing that, especially now. I mean, back in the day for sure, but with Islam and Khabib previously, it's a little less clear. But I mean, the level of achievement is so outrageous that even if some of those you only want to give partial credit, it's still so much that it's just mind-boggling. Y'all hear Godzilla? Godzilla came back from school and is just rampaging down through Tokyo. All right. Personally, I was far from bored watching Islam versus JDM. Yeah, me too. I was more so impressed than anything. The narrative that JDM versus Islam was the same as Khamzat DDP is insane to me. Yes, it does not make any sense. Islam was constantly threatening Darce's Kimuras, tried trapping the arm, BJ Penn style, to go for the rear naked choke. That's the arm trap from the back. At one point, tried isolating an arm triangle, and at quite a few points, he postured up and delivered solid elbows. This was all happening while having to deal with a much squirmier and technically better opponent than Khamzat had. I mean, there's just no question. Khamzat never postured up, never attacked the sub. Plus, he struck a lot more with Jack, landing great low kicks and body kicks. Do you agree with my overall assessment? How impressed were you by Islam being able to dominate a bigger opponent like this? This was what the video about I had yesterday was for. Again, I put it out before I realized, or before I became aware of some of these interviews or comments that were out there, because you're just but I think the general point that I wanted to make in the video was largely true. I guess for the portions I selected, whatever the game plan was, JDM got away from it at points. There's just no question. And I think you could make let's ask a question. What could Islam have done a little bit more of? Right? Because if the goal was to occupy half guard, beat the knee shield when you could, occupy half guard, so your hip is covering the inside of their hip, you're turking the bottom leg, they can't get that belly out because the bottom leg is trapped, right? What more could he have done? And my answer to that would be ground and pound on top. But the reality is, if you open up a lot with ground and pound against an opponent that's squirmy, they're going to get up. Now, that's not to me saying he couldn't have done a little bit more, but go back to the Khamzat DDP one. There was no resistance. Right to mount, right to back, almost right to crucifix. Like shredding the guard. No resistance whatsoever. The idea that if you're able to pass someone's guard that effortlessly, the idea that you can't open up because they'll regard, so what? So what? You'll just pass it again. It's like a black belt going up against a brand new blue belt. Oh, if I pass their guard and I go to knee on belly, they might be able to push off and, belly out. So what? You'll just dominate the next sequence. They can't resist what you're doing. The level of skill is too great. And that was, to me, the issue there was, again, it wasn't even he wasn't even in coherence with the rules. The rules tell you can't even do that. Just take a dominant position, C grip or gable grip around the chest. He can't build DDP can't build height, and you're just kneeing him in the thigh. This is not winning. And you can get to that position whenever you want, almost quite literally. So I really reject that. Whereas Islam, he might have decided he wasn't going to pass, even though he might have been threatening it at times to bait reactions from JDM. But he was trying much more, and he had a guy underneath who could not execute. But if you gave him a little bit of daylight, he was going to be gone. Like, he had that 2-on-1 grip. He was getting to the side. There were times he had the Z guard or the knee shield, and he was ready to go. Again, look at the end of the third when Islam actually does, because Islam does pass his guard. At the end of the third, he goes right to the belly, and then Islam kind of covers it from a front headlock or sort of a front headlock series position. You know what I mean? You had someone underneath who was ready to go with a lot of different tools. Islam shut most of that down. I find that's a different conversation than whether or not, like, again, two kind of conversations. Is it the same as what DDP and Khamzat did? To me, that just totally exaggerated. I really don't like the comparison. There's a little bit of truth to it, but it's very exaggerated. And then the other side, which is, okay, even if all of that is true, how accessible is this as a means of entertainment to somebody who has never trained? Just a casual fan, just an average donk showing up, has a beer at Buffalo Wild Wings, just wants to watch a great night of fights. You can mock that person, but that person is the majority of the MMA fan base. That's just a reality. If it's not accessible to people like that, there is a bit of a problem. But my answer to that in the video was, there was no point with Islam and JDM where Islam is stalling. There's not a single moment where you can say that. It doesn't exist. He has constantly got JDM working, and JDM's constantly trying to do stuff underneath. It's just not the case. But there was a shit ton of it in the fight with DDP and Khamzat. And my belief is if you enforce stalemates or stalling in fights where it's happening more effectively than at moments where fights are, not necessarily the most pleasing to the casual fan, there'll be less consternation about that because you enforced it back here. And Mark Goddard stood him up twice, but people were like defending, oh, leave it down there. Why the fuck would you leave him down there? It's stalled out. Move this shit along. You can't, it's bad as an entertainment product, yes, but it's also not even in, as I mentioned, coherence with the rules. That's not the case with Islam at all. The conversation with Islam is, do you have to have, do you have to be a reasonably informed fan for this to even be entertaining to you? And if you do, you have a problem. Hey, Luke, dumb question. Is it legal to feint an illegal strike? I think yes. I mean, I'm not sure how you would feint a ball kick without it being treated like an inside leg kick. So I'm not sure how that would work. If you had your hands up like this, like you were ready to do it, the referee would probably warn you to be careful, but that doesn't mean you can't like do that. I don't know of any rule that you can't fake the attempt. You couldn't go through with it. I guess the point I'm trying to make is, to the extent you set it up and it's visibly able by the referee to be interpreted as an illegal strike that's coming, they might prevent you from doing that. But, like, I'm not sure what else, like how would you fake a strike to the clavicle? I'm not sure how that would work. But I'm saying there might be ways in which they could be prevented, but I don't think in the rules you're not even allowed to fake it that way. I don't think that's quite right. Herzog has yet to officiate a fight since the Bulgarian scandal, and it being alleged that his fights worked have been flagged. They are just allegations. What do you make of this? Obviously hard to speak on this without any hard evidence or knowledge of specifics, but definitely an interesting observation to note. Yeah, BC and I were talking about this after Monday's MK. We were walking to the train station together. We were talking about it. And, we don't know. He didn't know anything. I didn't know anything. But it's pretty clear that there are, how shall we say, until more information is available, they're acting out of, at a bare minimum, an abundance of caution, right? They don't know. This does not mean he did anything, but because there is at least an implication or perhaps a perception, in order to, unless an investigation has been concluded and you can say, okay, we can definitively say he has done nothing wrong, then you can return him back to rotation and he can be involved in that way. But if you don't do that, then what's going to happen to betting on fights he's involved with, right? So it's not an admission he did anything wrong. It might be an admission that they're looking into it. They might have suspicions, or it could also just be, okay, we think it's fine, but we can't, the integrity of the product will be affected if we just plug you right back in, given what has been alleged. We have to wait until there's some kind of formal demarcation line that, again, in theory, absolves you, and then we can put you back in rotation, right? That might be the case. Also, it's not really the UFC's call, it's the commission's call. The UFC can request the commission who to bring, who not to bring. Perhaps they have done that. We'll see if Herzog is reffing any fights for any other organization. We shall see. But if it's a commission issue and they don't want to use him, that's basically like a de facto ban until it gets lifted. So the fact that he's absent is not a coincidence to me. But until we have better information, it is also not proof of wrongdoing. It could just be them being like, can you imagine the shitstorm of just putting him back in these fights and like some kind of crazy shit happens in the middle of the fight that and imagine it really truly had nothing to do with him, but some crazy shit happens, people are going to be, I mean, it would, you can imagine the firestorm this would create. I think that either the UFC or the commission or both are like, we have to resolve this one way or the other before we can do anything. Oh, let's get to this one because I haven't had a chance to weigh in on this yet. What did you think about Dana White's comments regarding Francis Ngannou on Andrew Schultz's podcast? Yeah, this was big. I wanted to do a video about this yesterday, but I put up 2 videos on both my channels, and for different reasons, had to take both of them down. The other one I was able to put back up. Just a bit of a nightmare day, and I wasn't able to get to it. So let's get to it now. If you didn't hear, basically what Dana says is there was this dispute that they had over whether or not Francis felt like there was a dispute anyway. He wanted a $50K bonus based on a performance. He didn't get one. And in some kind of argument, in a private location, Dana alleges that he put his hands on him, not like punching him, but kind of grabbed him. Let me get the exact wording because I don't want to mess this up here. Okay, here's what he said. Francis Ngannou was in the hallway hanging out, and I said, "Come on in. What's going on?" He was pissed off he didn't get $50,000 in his last fight. I'm starting to leave, and he grabs me by my shirt and pushes me, or grabs me by the shirt and pushes me back in the office. And I said, "Dude, get your fucking hands off me." Hunter Campbell started to walk away. Francis grabbed him by the fucking back of his collar and fucking pulled him back and said, "We're not done talking yet." Okay. So, what can we say about this? I saw some people joking, being like, "Oh, you want me to like Francis even more?" I'm not going to say that. I mean, listen. First thing I'm going to say is, to the extent that that is true, how could you defend it? You can't. If what he is saying is true, you can't possibly defend it. You just can't do it. And there is no defense of it, nor am I even going to try. What a waste of time this would be. You're not allowed to fucking put your hands on people. It's the same thing I said, it's, it's slightly different situation. Well, it's a pretty different situation, but you get the idea. There is no defense of it. If you're frustrated, if you feel like you've been wronged, there are ways to handle that have nothing to do with grabbing people, to the extent that is true. That's the first thing I'm going to say. Second thing I'm going to say is I'd like to hear Francis's side of the story. I'd like to hear that side of the story. Third of all, wouldn't there be footage of this? Wouldn't they have security cameras that would pick this up? I mean, you can definitively prove this one way or the other, I would imagine, right? I'd be very surprised if they didn't have cameras that picked up on this. And they would probably have the date and be able to locate this relatively easily. But to my knowledge, we don't have that yet, or we may never have it. I mean, guys, if someone came to you and said an MMA fighter engaged in unprofessional behavior and, not just unprofessional behavior, but physically abusive behavior, would this be surprising to you? It would not be surprising to me. It would not be surprising to me. I mean, these are guys that essentially, professionally, but adjudicate disputes through violence. That's what they do. And many of them, most of them, nearly all of them, are underpaid, particularly the very good ones. This is going to make them, this is going to create a combustible situation. Even with that, that's not defense of putting your hands on someone, because there isn't. There isn't. So it is entirely possible he did it. And if he did it, I'm not going to be like, how could this happen? How could it be that a big MMA fighter, again, assuming it's true, could have put their hands on someone that they didn't like to try and physically intimidate them? Are you kidding me? I mean, if you didn't know it was Francis they were talking about, and they told you an MMA fighter did this, would you be like, well, that sounds That sounds so unlike them. Be serious. Like, it doesn't sound implausible at all. That's not me saying it's true or it's not. It just, is it implausible? No, it's not implausible. I think the thing I would say is, in response to all of it, if that's the truth, then fine, he's a bad guy. But what Dana has also tried to say is that Dana is a bad guy for not essentially taking the UFC's deal and going on his own, or to the PFL and to boxing. Right? There was an implication that he was, if not disloyal and kind of dumb for making it, just kind of one of these guys who's so self-involved that he didn't want to go along with the promoter's assessment of what they wanted him to be. Under no circumstance does that make him a bad guy. And in fact, for the promoter to even expect such a thing is ludicrous. More to the point, again, if he did this, there's no defense of it. Fine. But Dana's got a lot of bad guys on roster. Remember, after Conor McGregor is adjudicated to be liable for sexual assault of Nikita Hand, they asked him what his response was, and he acted like someone was asking him what his favorite flavor of type of apple is. You know, sweet, or, Fuji, or, Red Delicious or something. Like some kind of irrelevant question. He wouldn't do anything about it. Didn't care. They've got a guy posting, I guess he stopped now, but it was posting literal, not even like approximate, literal Nazi imagery all over. Swastikas, photos of Goebbels, you name it. They didn't do anything. They didn't care. They've got guys who are charged with fairly serious and heinous crimes, and they have to get their ankle monitor removed. They keep using them. They rehabilitated Greg Hardy. Here comes Gable Steveson, who was only able to avoid extremely serious charges related to sexual assault by virtue of a loophole that they've now closed in Minnesota law. Since when does Dana White get to be the arbiter of who is good and who is bad? More to the point, if he is bad, they still kept him on the roster after this point and then tried to re-sign him for one of the biggest deals in the UFC. Like, they do business with bad people, and they, for the most part, don't seem to mind. That is not a defense of putting your hands on someone by any stretch of the imagination, because once again, there isn't one. There's no place you can go to other than like self-defense, which does not sound like this was involved. There isn't one. But then everyone being like, well, Dana says the guy's a bad person. Since when is his assessment of who is good and who is bad worthwhile at all? His ability to read that, to me, is diminished to the point of irrelevance. You can judge Francis by his actions. These are allegations, but, who knows? You can judge him by these things. And if it turns out that he's bad, he's bad. It wouldn't... Do I seem particularly attached to Francis? Like, I've spoken to him one time in my whole fucking... Well, maybe one or two times, one time. And again, I'm not even saying it's true or it's not. I'm just saying that I appreciate what he did in terms of blazing a path that wasn't being told what to do. He wanted to go and make the most amount of money for himself. On that level, I appreciate his actions. But if he's putting hands on people and he's intimidating them, well, then, yeah, you're allowed to draw conclusions about it. I'm just telling you, a fight promoter telling you a guy is bad is worthless. Means less than nothing. Now, to that point, Ant, who works with me on this channel, he also believes he's seen, I don't know if he saw that particular incident one way or the other, but has seen what, in his estimation, Francis acting in a kind of like a bullying way in UFC offices. I'm not there, but I take Ant to be a straight shooter with me. Could be true. Could be true. Maybe it is. But again, those acts are separate from a guy having self-determination over his career and then us listening to the moral assessments of fight promoters. I cannot think of someone who has less ability to weigh in on those character traits and the assessment of them than a fight promoter. And it's not just true for him. Can you imagine De La Hoya being like, "Wow, that other guy's a scumbag. So-and-so's a scumbag." It's like, Oscar, Maybe that's true. Maybe what Oscar is saying is true. You're hardly the authority on this in terms of evaluating the moral character of others. Can you imagine such a thing? You would treat it as ludicrous. This to me is no different. So if he put his hands on Dana, the worst. Can't do it. Absolutely wrong. And again, Ant has said he has seen things, not quite like that, but kind of intimidation, bullying tactics in the UFC offices. Listen, maybe he is not a great dude, but that roster is full of not great dudes. And it's because they do business with not great dudes who have problems with the law all the time. And you don't see Dana saying that those people are bad people. You cannot trust his assessment of anyone else's moral character at all. It means nothing. All right. With that in mind, it's time now for the paid portion of the show. All right. So if you're a member, you can contribute for free. But if you are not, if you'd be so kind, you don't have to, but it goes a long way. You can contribute something in the super chat. We'll put your question up on the screen and we'll get to it. Reminder, Toiletries, 25% off site-wide right now. There's a link in the description box. Black Friday sales have begun. Toiletries will take care of you, whether it is shavers, whether it is organizers, whether it is scrubs, brushes, creams, lotions, you name it. They've got it all. I use Toiletries products literally every single day. They work, they're modern, they're effective, and they last. It is absolutely putting money into something that is good for you and is going to last you a good long while. Bang for your buck. Isn't that what we all want? Bang for your buck? Toiletries. Go get it.
Pull in for the full scrub. Back, body, face, head, we got you covered. From your chest hairs to downstairs, no nicks, no worries. Toiletries, helping men feel good and look good.
All right, there we have it. With that in mind, let's get to our questions. All right. Max says, Luke, am I being unfair in not believing Ian Gary when he says he's going to KO Belal? No. The guy is so overly cocky, it makes me cringe. Again, probably being unfair. Does he need... Well, that's not the issue. Does he need an exciting win in order to get the title shot? That's really not the issue. The issue is not him being cocky. The issue is he hasn't KO'd anyone really good. Dude, look at his record. Hold on. Okay. Carlos Praches, decision. Shafkat, he loses to. Michael Page, decision. Jeff Neal, decision. Neil Magny, decision. The last time he stopped a guy was over 2 years ago. It was D-Rod, which is a nice win. And then Song Keenan before that. And then before that, Gable Green, he went to decision. Darian Weeks, decision. And then his UFC debut back in 2021, KO'd. The highest level guy he's KO'd is D-Rod. Not a bad KO win. That's a nice one, but of all like the really good guys he's fought, or at least the more highly ranked guys, he's not really getting all that close. That's why him saying, "Oh, I'm going to KO Belal," it'd be nice, but that would be by far not only his best win, it'd be his best KO win. Did you see the New York Times piece on Homeland Security agents who worked on CSAM terrorism cartels were redirected to immigration? Yes, I did. That's been reported for quite some time. The piece is called Homeland Security Missions Falter Amid Immigration. Yeah, so this is widely across law enforcement, FBI officials and other ones. And by the way, they did that during the surge that was here. They took them away from investigations that they were involved in and put them on immigration. This is the brainchild of Stephen Miller. This is who this comes from. I've tried to explain this to you. I'm actually, I mean, There are so many ways. I've said this a million times, but there are so many ways in which to understand how destructive this is. You're tearing apart families. You have parents who don't have legal status, but you have children who do. You deport them, and the children are, in many cases, either have to go with them, or if they're old enough, they can be left here with some other kind of caretaker. But what are you doing to families? That's one argument. I've tried to explain to people that people think that they are, they're net recipients of tax dollars. The average immigrant over the course of their life contributes over $250,000 net positive to public coffers, both through themselves as well as the progeny and the children that they have, who end up becoming both, obviously they're vastly exceed their own language barrier problems. They have the children of immigrants rise through the economic ladder much faster than the children of natives. These are facts. This is not in dispute. But the thing I want everyone to really understand is we are about to have skyrocketing healthcare premiums because they did not renew the subsidies, which, again, we've talked about this before. The ACA, the subsidies that were put in place during the pandemic to essentially allow people to make it more incentivized for people to buy into the system, and then also to just make the cost more affordable, both of them. Those subsidies ran out. They didn't renew them. And so you're going to get a new estimate of premiums here in January. All of our premiums are going to go up. Some are going to go up to the point where they're going to have to drop out of the ACA altogether. And, this is going to create this disaster in healthcare, to say nothing of the fact that they've now proven through studies that private equity, when they take over hospital systems, that deaths measurably go up. So care is getting worse. Hospitals are getting more expensive. Insurance is going away for many in the next year, to say nothing of the cost of living, to say nothing of what happens to Social Security when you turn 65, to say nothing of what happens to funding Medicare programs, these entitlement programs. Did you know that if we don't fundamentally change the immigration system, there's no real way to pay for them in the next 30 years? It's not possible. It mathematically cannot be done. So depending on your age or what you're thinking about, if you're retiring at any point in the next 30 years or later, this is something you should consider. If we don't have a sufficient amount, and of course we're talking about legal immigration, but stick with the program. These programs cannot be financially solvent. And what you've noticed is places like Canada and Japan have become keenly aware of the problem as their populations age. They're having the same problem. So now Japan, famously closed door to immigrants, is slowly beginning to change their immigration laws. Canada's been changing them for the last decade because they want to be they're immigration beggars. They have to beg for immigrants to come over to help make these programs that they have solvent over the course of the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. It's not possible. It is mathematically not possible without them, unless you just completely rip the programs apart where you're not eligible until you're 85, worthless at that point, right? I mean, there's just no way to make it work. So we have not had that problem in the United States. We have not been immigration beggars. We've been immigration choosers because everyone wants to come here. But now you're changing that equation, while these other places that are recognizing financially long-term, if we don't change the way we're doing this, we're not going to be able to afford any of this shit. They're now making it much more competitive for immigrants who are from outside of those countries too, where they want to go, while we're telling them to get the fuck out of this country, while we haven't updated the immigration system in terms of allotments for green cards, for various visas, you name it, since 1990. Guys, this is not hard to figure out what's going to happen. Aside from everything else I've mentioned related to the tax base, related to what it does to communities, related to the immorality of it all, related to what it means to have cops who are, you guys ever read the book Rise of the Warrior Cop by Radley Balco, where he talks about how the police during the course of our lives in the last 40 years of the 20th century, and now this one, they've just become militarized, like what it all means for that to happen. All of these things, to have a for-profit detention system, forgetting that culture is remix culture generally. Some things are tradition, but it's constantly in a state of remix. I didn't know salsa doesn't come from South America. Salsa was invented when different Spanish-speaking groups in New York in the early part of the 20th century got together and created a new form of music, then repopularized it back to the Spanish-speaking world. Culture is remix culture. Putting all of that aside, just in terms of the ability of this government to function, to care for seniors, to care for the poor, to care for the sick, on basic social safety net programs. We will not be able to afford it without redoing our immigration system completely. And the shit that they're pulling is a ticking fucking time bomb. You are being warned. The scholarship on this is not ambiguous. It is crystal clear. The math is not hard to figure out. It won't work without them. So I keep telling people, you have a decision to make. Do you wish to live in an ethno-state whose government cannot function, who cannot do basic services that you would want it to do, to say nothing of third rail programs? I'm talking about everything else too, disaster relief, you mention it. Or do you want to live in a place that can thrive, where your kids can afford to go to college, where programs that are absolute necessity to happen can be funded and work properly? Doesn't seem like a very difficult choice to me. Will Trump and Bondi honor the release of all the files? There are loopholes throughout this thing. You may have read about some of them. Your guess is as good as mine. I don't think that they're going to just release everything without some kind of complicating factors, things redacted, things withheld, things limited under scope because some of it's under investigation, you name it. I would be surprised if they release everything, but the pressure is on, certainly. How would Khabib, Islam, Khamzat have fared in Pride? They would, I mean, you had a ring and they had 10-minute first rounds, so maybe that would have changed some, but not really. I mean, the best Pride lightweights were like Takanori Gomi, Marcus Aurelio, for a little while, Jens Pulver. Yeah, I mean, those guys would have feasted. Khamzat at 85. Oh. It's my wife. Okay. They would have feasted. Their skill sets are too modern, and all of them, they can use the cage for takedowns. They don't need it. Izzy says, it would clog up both divisions, but the only real reason to make Ilia versus Islam is the novelty. You'd have two weight classes champs meeting at the peak of their powers, and Ilia would be fighting for a third weight class belt. Yes, it's to see if somebody can get three. Because you're not really making the argument. We think Ilia at 70 is the best, or I should say, the toughest fight for Islam. Is that what we're arguing? I'm not arguing that. I think you're right. It's just to see if we can get a triple champ. That's it. Will Paul versus Joshua be more or less competitive than Butterbean versus Johnny Knoxville? Also, can we add the voicemail of you farting to the MK soundboard? I don't know if we have an MK soundboard, but I'll if I still have it, I'll do I have it? Let's see. Oh, I think I do. Yes, we can do. Joshua Paul. I mean, that can't be competitive, right? I mean, it can. It shouldn't be. That should be a destruction. If it's anything less than a destruction, it's a problem. I'll say more competitive than Knoxville and Butterbean, but maybe not much more. Why is MMA Guru talk moderated? I don't know. Is it? I don't know. Do we want to talk about him? I don't know. I'm not sure what the issue is. What is this? I'm not sure if this is a member or not. Hey, L, not to interpret your gingham check. Okay, you don't like what I'm wearing. All right. I mean, I'm not sure what to say about that. I'd love for you to weigh in on Grok saying that overall Elon Musk is a better model for fitness than LeBron James. AI is going great. Yeah. Also, he says, money is going to be irrelevant in 20 years. It's like, well, why did you insist on a $1 trillion pay package then? Yeah, I mean, he's torched Grok. That's not the only thing that I saw. There's other stuff I've seen where they've just completely made Grok unusable. Grok still has some value in like trying to see if like, hey, is this AI or fake? Is there a news report attached to this? And Grok can kind of find that. But like in terms of getting Grok to make qualitative assessments, you can imagine how awful you have to feel about yourself to make AI lie to the world about you. Incredible. I notice every time Valentina moves on the feet, she does this bounce reset. Do you think that contributes to her always being positioned to counter? Of course it does. When you're bouncing like that, you can explode in directions, right? You can move, typically in one direction more than other ones. But if you're flat-footed, you're a little bit more waiting on contact. Bouncing enables you to move on the balls of your feet. Absolutely. No question. All right. There's a lot of questions here tagged, and I don't know if any of these people are members. I sparred a ranked Bellator 135er, Jordell Lugo. I was starting my amateur career, and it was such an eye-opener. Jordell Lugo was very good. Love to hear your thoughts on how big the difference between pros and amateurs. I mean, at the lower levels, it's not. But Jordell Lugo is actually really good. He's got an Instagram account where he talks like how to like he'll show street fights and like what things worked and what didn't. It's kind of a fun little thing he's got going on. He's real talented. He was good about accepting pressure. He was a lot. By the way, I talked to him at one of these XFC shows. He was self-trained for a lot of that. He never really fully had a team. There's places he would train, things he'd pick up on, but he kind of did his own thing for long stretches. At the lower level, like a high-level amateur guy who's got 10 AMI fights or something, and then a guy who's like 1-0 or 2-0, there's virtually no difference. But if you get a guy who's like 15 fights in and they're very good and they're in Bellator, your chance of winning against them in sparring, if you're the same size or something, and you're not, you're going to get tuned up. You're going to get tuned up. Have I taken a chance to look at the last Apex card of the year? Brother, I've barely looked at the card this weekend. I mean, that's not true. I've done prep for tomorrow's show, but no, I've not. Question for LT. Thoughts on Mamdani not endorsing, I don't know how to pronounce this guy's name, I'll say, after challenging Jeffries. Seems backwards based on his recent campaign. I've only seen headlines about this, but apparently he told him not to primary Jeffries. I think him and Jeffries must have worked out some kind of deal. I don't know what that is. Once again, everyone, I don't believe. First of all, I don't live in New York City, so it's not my mayor. But more to the point, everyone keeps doing this failed bit where it's like, oh, I believe in this politician, not that one. I do not believe in any of them. Some are going to be better than others, but to the point you raised, Jeffries should be primaried immediately. And also, he kept in Tish to run, the NYPD. Now, of course, he didn't really run on issues of police reform. He ran on issues of affordability. So keeping that in place makes some kind of sense to a degree anyway. But I don't look at this man and think like, oh, this is our savior. I think that's a big mistake. That doesn't mean I think that the things he would support in certain cases might be better than another candidate relative to, let's say, Andrew Cuomo. But I don't like, oh, my hope rests in this man. No, it doesn't. Carnage says, so Ngannou could be a jerk, but the story seems fake, right? I don't know if it's fake. Could be exaggerated. I don't know. Dana never fails to throw people under the bus when they burn him. Why wait so long to tell such a damning story out? I'd imagine there might be a few stories like that. Also, let me see something. Dana White even talked about it in 2020 about how his bodyguards, I think I was there that night. I mean, I guess I can talk about it now. I was there that night. It was in Baltimore, I believe, where I don't know. I didn't see it, but I talked to Ariel after it happened. I guess there was some kind of miscommunication between Ariel and Dana, and they may have, again, I'm not sure what precipitated it, but that Ariel got like taken by one of Dana's bodyguards and like thrown against the wall. Again, I talked to Ariel that night. That was the Jones versus Glover Teixeira fight. That was in Baltimore. I mean, again, there is no defense assuming what Dana is saying is alleging about Francis is true. What can you say? Oh, he had a good reason to do it. There is no good reason. It doesn't exist. Like, you can't go to that place. But at the same time, it's like, this is, guys, you do not have an obligation to take the claims of a fight promoter seriously until there's corroborating evidence. Not saying they're wrong, but this like, oh, we're going to lightly or even fully trust. And again, it's not just Dana, Don King, Bob Arum, Don Davis, Scott Coker, any of them, Bjorn Rebney. It doesn't matter. You do not have an obligation to take their statements at face value. And in fact, I would argue in general, it's a mistake to do so. Didn't Long Island grow up in Australia? No, he grew up here. If so, why doesn't he have an accent? For that reason. Also, why do you chase your tequila? Trying not to get too buzzed? Yes. I have to go, so the way it works is I take a train. I'm usually home. I get to DC around 5-ish, give or take, depending on which train it is and blah, blah, blah. And then I'm usually home, depending, 5:15, 5:30, 5:45. Again, it all kind of varies in there. But my kid's still around. I have to go be a dad. I can't go get super fucked up and then get on the train and then, I guess you could sleep it off on the ride or something. I don't know, but I just don't. I'm trying to be, relatively engaged when I get home. I can't mess that up too much. Forgive me if you've discussed this. Are you a fan of Bertrand Russell? I mean, I read him in college. I've not read since. I only recently started reading him and have been blown away with his forward thinking. It's been so long since I've engaged with the works of Bertrand Russell. I'd be speaking out of turn, but yes, he's one of the titans of 19th or 20th century philosophy. Let me see something here. I'll get you that recommendation at the end. Okay. Here we go. Luke, do you think immigrants from certain regions inherently add more value to the U.S. and should immigration prioritize origin and perceived worth? It already does. There's no question. If you look at the statistics, the amount of value that an immigrant with a college education and fluency or proficiency in the native language, in this particular case, English, not the official language, we don't have one, but English, this vastly produces higher gains, vastly. It increases investment more over the long term. It increases innovations at firms that have them. You don't have to pay for their education. They already come here educated versus somebody who comes here and they might get an education here and then they can maximize their value more. But if they already come here educated, let's say they got educated in China, let's say they got educated in, Finland or something, you don't have to pay for it. There's simply no question. There's absolutely no question they produce more. Now these are turning people into what they produce on a spreadsheet. I think the question about what your immigration policy should probably be a little bit more expansive than merely these kinds of cold mathematical calculations. But it's not really in debate. That's immigration scholars, to the best of my knowledge, don't even argue about that. Certainly that's the case. That doesn't mean that there aren't contributions throughout the immigration experience or the immigrant profile, even if they don't necessarily have if they're not high skilled or highly educated. There are other ways in which they can benefit, but absolutely that's the case, and that should be prioritized. In fact, this is what Zeke Hernandez has been arguing. As I mentioned before, we've not redone the allotment and lottery system around how many green cards we give out, how many visas we give out, what visas we give them out to, H-1B or otherwise. We haven't updated that system since 1990. And the point he tries to make is we have to rethink this for a modern economy. The economy is 3 times the size now as it was in 1990. The needs are more. And of course, we know this. It's not the only driver. Family reunification, for example, can be a driver. But one of the main drivers, if not the number one driver, is labor demand. And we know that if you grant a legal pathway for it, that is a substitute, not a complement to illegal immigration. So, for example, you can offer a temporary pass, a 5-year visa to go to a low-skilled immigration employee or, a visa holder to do, landscaping in Iowa or, some kind of firm's work that related to clean energy. Now that we're speaking of Iowa, that's one of their main industries there. You can do that, and then the visa is shortened and they have to go back. And then you can create an allotment for ones who have, a variety of set of skills, who come more educated. They might have family here, you name it. You can absolutely prioritize along that, but it at least should match the modern economy. And we should be making conscious choices about this rather than having this restricted system. Now people are overstaying their visas who come here. Now people are just, and you have to have an orderly border. Now they're just, pouring over that. Like, there's all kinds of ways in which, at a bare minimum, the whole thing needs to be more orderly. The whole thing needs to be modernized. And you can make some of these calculations about what's valuable and what's not in conjunction with reforming the system. But we don't even do that. I'd love to see you interview Jordan Sullivan with the Fight Dietitian. He's worked with... Oh, is this the... Oh, yes, I know him. Yes, he's worked with Izzy, Volk, Leon, and many more. He's extremely insightful. Any idea if that's possible? I'm sure it's possible, but I just don't have anything to ask him at the moment. I've officially canceled my ESPN Plus account, and I do not plan to subscribe to Paramount Plus. The end of my 10-plus year MMA UFC fandom is most likely over. Wow. The reasons I believe are obvious. MAGA. Thank you, Luke, for the content. Once again, I get emails and messages and DMs like this, and then people will tell me, oh, yeah, MMA is not a right-wing sport. Brother, it's already over. It's not changing now. It already did. It's done. Now, could it go back to something else or change in the future? I'm sure that it will. But like that transition's finished. As a USMC vet, if you were a teenager all over again, would you still be happy to enlist in the military and serve under this administration? No, I wouldn't do it. No. Nope. I joined... So technically, I've said this before, I technically signed up in 1997 because the way it worked is basically maybe it's different now, but at the time, every enlisted contract was eight years. You could do 4 active, 4 reserve, 4 active, 4 inactive, ready reserve, where you can kind of just go back to your life, and then they're almost certainly not going to call you unless it's some kind of national emergency. You can do what I did, which was 6 years of what they call active reserve. You're reservist, and then 2 years inactive ready. And so what the deal was, if I signed up my junior year in high school, I didn't graduate till 98, they would count my essentially all of my senior year. So from the summer of 97 to the summer of 98, I went to Paris Island in June 1998. They would count that as one of my years of inactive ready reserve. So by the time I was done with my initial 6 years, I would only have 1 year left on my inactive ready reserve. And in fact, they activated my unit while I still had my inactive status, but they didn't need to go deep into the well to get me. What I've tried to explain this many times, I was in Marine Corps artillery. This was being phased out. This was a World War II era thing. The artillery that the U.S. military needed largely came from the Army. Now, some of that changed when they were combating ISIS, when they had to get as many artillery batteries as possible. They converted they didn't even keep my unit around. Again, I'm not sure what it is now, but at the time, Hotel Battery 314, 4th Marine Division, I was in it from 98 to 04. They changed them to a rifle company to go send them to do prisoner transport in Iraq after I got out. So they didn't even keep them being artillery. All the things I'd ever trained would have been worthless because that's not what even they kept them around for. So the point I'm trying to make is they did not have a strong need for it. They were rotated people and fresh bodies in for, some of the more menial or other tasks that were available, but they didn't even have them in. The point I'm trying to make is I joined at a time when dude, the world was different in 1997 and 1998. It seemed much more stable. Even with the Oklahoma City bombing in 93, it just, I don't know, it seemed more orderly, and it seemed like international war at that time was so unlikely. Of course, we'd find out later that was not the case, but no, I would not join now. Who are 2 or 3 guys you'd match Bo Nickal up with next? I've said this before, dude. It doesn't have to be anybody ranked. It doesn't have to. And what's the last part of it? Also, what are some matchups you'd put on the main card for the UFC on Paramount pay-per-view opener? I would put Ilia on that one. I would leave card creation to somebody else, but What was the first part of that question? Oh, Bo Nickal. Nobody ranked. Modest incrementation here. Modest from where we just were. Why would the UFC give Wellmaker the Ewing fight on 2 days' notice? Ewing was coming off of an impressive KO win and looked very dangerous. Because they like to ship product on time, and the whole goal of what they do often is just to keep making sure that the product gets shipped on time, even if it is not advantageous to themselves long-term in certain ways, or certainly in the short run, disadvantageous to some of the more prized talent. Now, in the end, he got kind of shown up, but the number one thing that they do is they create product and ship it just constantly. Trains are leaving the station on time. That's what they do over and over and over and over and over again. That's what the product is built on, rather than just kind of pulling it. But dude, think about like the Isaac Bulgarian scandal. They could have pulled that. They're just like, yeah, fuck it, let it go. You know what I mean? Like they don't have they I think their sense of internal restraint about some of these things could be a little stronger. After Islam's success at 70, do you think more fighters will need to consider moving up in weight? No. Is weight cutting becoming a disadvantage to energy? This is a conversation we've had a million times. They've basically found the narrow but effective range at which you can cut. Jordan Sullivan is key about this, about how much you can actually cut, what rehydration protocol looks like, and what the range of possibility is. It's sort of a contained range that they basically all know now. The goal is just to keep weight cutting inside of that range, but guys are going to have to figure this out on their own. They're going to have to figure out, how much am I giving up? How much am I not? Islam is Islam. Like, you cannot look at that and be like, oh, I should cut less weight. Being a weight bully is effective. I'm not saying that's all Islam ever was. Obviously, that's silly. He's very, very talented, but guys cut a ton of weight for a very obvious reason. It confers enormous benefit, at least in certain ways. You know, the trick is just to narrow the scope of how much they can actually lose. After Islam's success at 70, do more fighters need to consider moving? Okay, we did this one already. Argument for Islam versus Morales next. If you can't outskill Islam, you have to bully him. Who but Morales stands such a chance? Great point. There's no way to argue Morales is as skilled as Islam. Impossible. Impossible to argue. So what would be the argument? He's just a physical beast, great takedown defense. But dude, I mean, Islam's a different kettle of fish, brother. But I think you give Morales and Praches. I think you do that one next. By the way, speaking of a January card, I don't think they can make it work, but you can put that one in February. That'd be sick. Thoughts on champions like Topuria and Khamzat being more interested in fighting the champion of the next weight class rather than defending their belt that they just got? Once again, the hardest thing to do in MMA is become a UFC champion and defend it over time. Going up a weight class is not easy, but I don't think it's as hard as actually doing that. So the biggest prize is that. The biggest history-making opportunity is that. And I think a lot of these guys just don't have respect for their contemporaries. Maybe they're right. Do you consider Joe Rogan to be an expert in MMA? And can someone who hasn't fought in the cage? Yes. I know he's very knowledgeable, but I'm honing in on the word expert. I mean, I would consider Ray Longo an expert. He never fought MMA. Certainly not even close. And I would consider him definitely to be to have great expertise. So yes, you know, John Danaher obviously has done some jiu-jitsu competitions, but he doesn't have any significant titles. But it'd be foolish to not call him an expert. So I don't think that you need to. I mean, certainly competing is extremely important, relatively speaking, but not by itself the only requirement. However, in Joe's case, I mean, he's certainly incredibly knowledgeable, right? I mean, it'd be silly to argue that he's not. But I also think he's got a lot of outdated ideas. I don't think he's quite as in tune with it as perhaps he once was. You know, he's been an important contributor to the growth of MMA. He was, for a while, the casual fans' whisperer. He made MMA more intelligible to audiences in the 2000s and the 2010s. And I think a lot of people don't, especially in the 2000s, he was critical in like not just being a cultural ambassador, but being a guy who could kind of quickly explain what was relevant and what was happening. And, you know, so he certainly has an enormous degree of knowledge, but like, An expert in MMA. In what sense? In the technical intricacies of fighting? I don't know if I'd call him an expert in that. In understanding the MMA world and how it works? I'd say in general, he might have a degree of expertise in that. It really means, it depends what you mean. Expertise is not one thing. Expertise in what kind of sort of question of competency are we asking? Extremely knowledgeable, obviously, historically, incredibly relevant and important. The expertise charge, I think, it depends what you mean. That shirt makes you look like the platonic ideal of a Chelsea boys version of a lumberjack. I don't know what that means, but okay. Legacies aside, skills only. What does your MMA top 5 all-time look like? Okay, good question. Penn, St. Pierre, Islam, just pure skill. Aldo, who'd be the 5th? I actually don't think Jones is one of the most skilled. I mean, he's obviously very skilled, but I don't know if he's top 5. Again, this is not comparing the wins. Just pure skills. I might go Khabib. I mean, oh no, Demetrious. Demetrious. Yeah, I might go. I mean, it's a question of who do you put, Demetrious, or do you put Khabib in there? You know what I'm saying? I don't know how to answer that one. I have to think about that one more, but something like that. Headed to DC as you speak. Good spot to eat. I remember you saying about Guar Bar. That's Richmond. Could be mistaken. I always give the same. Oh, you know what? I had a sandwich the other day from this place, and it was absurd. Absurd. Here, I'll tell you the name of it. So the one I always go to is Unconventional Diner, but y'all are probably sick of me hearing me say that. Here's another one. It's a sandwich joint. Focaccia sandwiches in Mount Pleasant. Brother, these sandwiches are so sick. They're unbelievably good. There's another one. Hold on. How about this one? Here's another one. Fossette Focacceria in Shaw. Here. This one. Take a screenshot. That one. Fossette Focacceria. The sandwiches there are to die for. Super good. Did you do the Patchy Mix vid on how good he was before? No. I got to set that up. I just fixed my internet. I had to do that first, which is now fixed. But yeah, we should do that. I want to do let's watch him through the Grand Prix, shall we? And see what happened. What chance would you give Islam at 85 against the top 5? I think the buck might stop there. He's a little too small. Who's the top 5 right now? Let's see. All right, your top 5 at 85 would be Brendan Allen, Anthony Hernandez. I don't think he's beating Hernandez. Sean Strickland. He's not beating Strickland. Imavov and Duplessis. I mean, maybe it might be Duplessis because his takedown defense was so bad. I mean, he might get a couple of wins, but I don't know that I'd like his chances overall. Luke, I've always been confused over the left-right scale. I see benefits to both free market and socialist economics, but what makes these left or right? It depends on who you're asking. I mean, there's a lot of claims about what socialism is, but I think if the idea of socialism is sort of like generally a free market economy, but you have robust antitrust enforcement as well as strong safety nets, people will call that socialist. But that seems to me like that's not really Venezuelan socialism. It's not, socialism's never worked. Well, it depends what you mean by that. I mean, what about Finland? What about Norway? Some of these Nordic countries, they've got models that are, again, moderately, for the most part, free market, again, with robust, there's some nationalization of industry, but most of it is just robust antitrust enforcement and then safety nets. But that doesn't seem, that if that's the boogeyman everyone is scared of, I don't know what the problem would be. Ali decried Craig and his contribution to MMA in general. However, I see Craig as a healthy ambassador for combat sports, while Ali is this person writes, a leech who upholds the UFC's monopoly. I mean, I just say this. I think, I don't know. Listen, if you have a performance like the one JDM did, reconsidering some of your things, even at a bare minimum, even if you don't change anything, but just taking a moment to be like, hey, what's working, what's not is an appropriate thing. And Craig by himself can't make anyone something that they're not, but he is obviously one of the most, I highly value his contributions, both in terms of his ideas as well as his advocacy for things. I saw what Ali said about him, like, deport him. It's like, what are we talking about? You know what I mean? Like, it's just, I don't know I ignore that. Also, I consider myself close to the center, but to many, this is fence sitting. But considering the spectrum of opinions people have, shouldn't government policy be more centrist? No. Does not need to be of a particular orientation to be effective. It needs to be effective. And whatever, you know what I mean? Like, political centrism is part of the reason why we are in the trouble that we're in, because that is a world of incrementalism that refuses to acknowledge broad-based problems until it's far too late. And in fact, can you imagine being a centrist during the time of slavery? I've said this before on, the John Brown's slave rebellion. And at the time he was considered, like, there were literal writings in the New York Times and other publications at the time being like, if he had just let slavery dissolve on its own, that would have been a preferable way to the killings that he engaged in. And now he's considered to be a hero. And I'm not telling you that people need to go around doing killing like John Brown. That's really not my point. But I'm trying to help people understand that, like, centrism as such is not some enlightened position. And in fact, I think currently in the emergency world in which we live, it is in fact a hindrance to progress, not a supporter of it. Given the current logjam and the top contenders being Praches and Morales, who could both use some time building their takedown and ground defense, does Kamaru now make the most sense? I don't know if Kamaru makes the most sense, but I do like the idea of Praches and Morales fighting one another. I think that's the fight to make for sure. Unless Rakhmonov comes back, in which case it changes the equation a little bit, but I love that fight between those two. Brian, welcome to the party. Luke, have you ever watched any sumo recreationally? Young Ukrainian guy is neck and neck with two Yokozuna in the last Grand tournament of the year right now. I don't know much about sumo except that it rocks. What happened to the pipeline of American wrestlers? We've talked about this. And who would you say has the closest style to GSP today, like a karate striker with a great double leg? I don't even know who that would be. I'm not even sure who that would be. But we talked about this before. NIL has affected it. The growth of... So NIL has been one. USA Wrestling changing some of its rules to, like, make sure that David Taylor stay in the participant in college to freestyle to coaching pipeline. Same with Jordan Burroughs. I think they're going to eventually do the same with him. Right? Upping the amount of money you would get for a gold medal. So that was another change. And also, like, for competing on various teams. So that was a big change. So the NIL, that. On top of it, I think people are aware that there's just not a lot of good money in UFC. UFC can sit here and pretend that there aren't long-term consequences to people understanding that the pay is not great in MMA, but I think it has deterred some of them. And then the last part about it, as I mentioned before, sport jiu-jitsu. You got guys like Michael Pixley, who would have been absolutely would have done MMA 10 years ago. Now doesn't need to get head trauma. He can just go train, and he's got a phenomenal skill set. Like, that is a real thing. So all four of those things to me are working in a way to pull that pipeline, or I should say, plug it up rather. Look at, we did this one already. I have firmly believed JDM was only champ because he was the one that got to fight Belal. Half the welterweight top 10 would have done the same that night. I guess we'll see. Well, now it makes Brady versus JDM more interesting, right? Or Rakhmonov versus JDM. That was always going to be pretty interesting. But now it makes it interesting as well. Kamaru versus JDM if they end up going that direction. Because now you're like, okay, well, let's actually see about the ground game, right? I can't believe you don't want to see Usman versus Islam. I mean, I wouldn't boycott it or something, but, like, dude, Usman's over the hill. He beat Buckley. Dude, Buckley had a real bad performance. I like Buckley, but he had a very bad performance. Like, dude, the guy lost to Leon Edwards twice. Like, what are we talking about here? Is saying your political opponents shouldn't be alive on social media 25th Amendment worthy? Of course it is. Just ask yourself what would be happening among the conservative media if President Obama was president, or Obama was president and was tweeting stuff like that. Hang him. Hang him. Can you imagine? How can you also say that there are no issues of not you, sir, but like the broader you? How can you say that that's not 25th Amendment worthy? How can you say that that's not a cognitive impairment, at least question? The guy mistook a test he had at Walter Reed that was a dementia test or a dementia screen essentially and thought it was an IQ test. If you watch his debates from like 2015, 2016, he was much sharper then. Now, I'm not telling you he's like meandering Biden style, but the idea like these questions are irrelevant. Why are they irrelevant? And then the level of partisan rancor, you know, people were making fun of Charlie Kirk dying. Not me. I don't think that you like, I feel like it's bad karma to do something like that. I don't take pleasure in it, but you know, them saying, oh, look how ghoulish they are. And the supporters of Trump won't have no ability to recognize he's doing this and see that as any kind of, oh, that's just him trolling. They did this sort of fascism is like this weird thing where people say outrageous, comically, absurd things, and it's always treated as unserious. But what that is, it's just always kind of like approximate in the conversation, and because it's always approximate in the conversation, all of a sudden it just becomes normalized at a later point at which they want to normalize it. The video that guy was reacting to was put out by, you know, Ilia Slotkin and some other folks who had served in the American military, saying you don't have an obligation to obey illegal orders. They don't. The oath is not to the commander-in-chief. The oath is to the Constitution. And then Stephen Miller saying that this is sedition, this is rebellion. No, it's not. They're calling an objective assessment of what the law actually is and what the rightful opportunities are in conjunction with the law. They're calling that rebellion and sedition. Hang them. Dude, we're in trouble. We're in trouble. Like, do you think this guy and this movement, they're just going to leave office if they lose elections? Assuming the elections are even free and fair? Do you think that? What on earth? The guy tried to steal a presidential election the first time, had a fake elector scheme. And now there's these not merely delusions of grandeur, just delusions. And it's becoming increasingly not merely more dangerous in sort of a broader sense, but the violence of the rhetoric is going up. Can you imagine? And it'll barely make the news. It all gets dismissed because there's this constant effort at making you unable to focus on any one thing by constantly introducing absurdity into it, purposely introducing absurdity into it, purposely introducing at times levity into it. But this is constant, dude. He puts out this video where he's taking dumps on all the protesters. This constant dehumanization of the opponents, this constant dehumanization of opponents' leadership, trying to go after Act Blue, the funding mechanisms of the rival, essentially main dominant party, trying to go after some kind of fake Antifa threat by making things that could get you hemmed up in some of these new laws, anti-capitalist views, anti-Christian views, whatever the hell that fucking means to them. I'm not making, you guys have seen this? Look. Look. I'll show it to you. Here, don't take my word for it. Trump's NSPM 7 labels common beliefs as terrorism indicators: anti-Christian, anti-American, and anti-capitalism. That's what they're calling this. Oops, excuse me. Let me close this. Look, here, hold on. Here's what they're looking at. The Trump administration isn't only targeting organizations or groups, but even individuals and entities whom NSPM 7 says can be identified by any of the following indicators of violence: anti-Americanism, whatever the fuck that means; anti-capitalism; anti-Christianity, of course; support for the overthrow of the United States government, fine; Extremism on migration, what does that mean? Extremism on race, what does that mean? Extremism on gender, what does that mean? Hostility towards those who hold traditional American views on family. What the fuck are you talking about? Hostility towards those who hold traditional American views on religion, and hostility towards those who hold traditional American views on morality. What the fuck does that even mean? Right? So this idea here that, like, I mean, look at the picture. All of it is being designed to marshal the forces of the federal government to diminish, attack, imprison, limit the scope and effectiveness and, frankly, the health of the rival political party. That's what it's all designed to do. And if you bring this up, they'll tell you have Trump derangement syndrome. But, like, look at what the fuck they're doing. I don't know how we solve this problem, because the other folks in the leadership, both in the cabinet and then, you know, the Republicans in Congress, for example, they have no appetite for confronting this terrible fact. Dude, when you have dangerous and when you have incompetent or otherwise compromised people in positions of leadership, a la Condoleezza Rice, bad shit happens. Tragedy happens. I'm just waiting to see what that looks like. What was the first UFC event you attended, and was it a fan or media? Jesus, I don't even know. What was the first UFC event I don't know. I don't remember. It's been so long. I don't know. I honestly couldn't tell you. I couldn't remember. I mean, it was probably as a fan. I don't know. I honestly, maybe was it the Broomfield, Colorado, Florian versus Lausanne? Maybe it was that. Maybe it was that in Broomfield, Colorado. I'm not sure. I don't know. Luke, Khabib did an interview on his rise about how his sparring partners are better than his opponents. Was he right? I don't think that he's wrong. He's probably right. Yeah. How do you think Islam Makhachev would handle the size and reach of a fighter like Morales? I think he'd be in on his legs or to the body lock, playing the high-low game for sure, or playing a head kick game to like a low shot, all that stuff. Luke, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but respectfully, I think your take about Val might be the worst one of your whole career. She made a phenomenal champ look like a regional fighter. She beat someone who was terribly undersized, who to me has good wrestling, not great wrestling. I would really question the premises of your views if that's what you think. Luke, on a scale from 1 to Oaf, rank these four men: BC, Dylan Dennis, Long Island Luke, and Burt Kreischer. Long Island, BC, Dennis, Burt Kreischer last. Thoughts on Dana White referring to Islam Makhachev teams as a Muslim brotherhood? I don't hesitate from criticizing Dana, but I don't think he meant anything by it. Yes, the Muslim Brotherhood. I think they recently were designated as a terrorist organization by the U.S. government. Correct me if I'm wrong. Did I see that in the news? Oh, no, Governor Abbott did. He declared the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist group in Texas. I don't think he meant anything by it. Not a great choice of words, but of all the things to be mad about, I don't think that's top of the list. Why is shifting DOE, Department of Education programs, bad if still existing? I've been so consumed with other things, I've not really been able to follow this story, so I'd be speaking out of turn. But that's a very silly question. Would you move things that belong to the Department of Defense to the Department of Energy? Would you move things from the Department of Energy to the Department of the Interior? Would you move things from the Department of the Interior to the Department of Education? These departments have specialized focuses. They have people who have been there for a long time. They have institutional knowledge. They have clearly understood forms of jurisdiction. They have the manpower to build out these programs and to see them through. They have all kinds of ways in which connectivity to other relevant industries, or I should say relevant other programs or departments, liaisons that they might work with, that all funnel from being there. Doesn't mean that they can't do some of the work or maybe all of it, but why would you have things moved around? Because it makes much more sense to have it within the relevant department. Did you hear anything about D-Rod being in prison in Mexico? I've seen rumors. I've not heard much more than that. LT may not like it, but I don't know what that is. What is that? Oops. Hold on. Okay. All right. Thoughts on Dave Smith and his views? I did a show with Dave Smith once. Would love to see you two chat. Also, Barry Robinson. Also, Izzy KO on Pereira. Best UFC KO of all time. One of the best ones, certainly. Thoughts on Dave Smith? I don't know the full extent of his views. I would say on Israel, I don't think there's a whole lot of difference between what he believes and I. On monetary policy, there's probably a significant difference, but I appreciate his advocacy on behalf of the Palestinian people. He has been a vocal advocate. Why is media so hollow and shallow in the UFC now? Well, because we've gutted it. We've gutted it. You've forced out of the industry people who do investigative work. We have turned the economy from one of what kind of stories of journalistic value do produce to performers in an attention economy. Dude, that's what I'm doing now. That's what I'm doing. I'm a performer in an attention economy now. That's what it is. They have blackballed journalists from the UFC, but that's not. You can't just blame it on them. I mean, that's part of it. The fighters didn't like journalists, and they made their jobs very, very difficult. Not all of them, but many of them. And then this destruction to the media system more broadly, and you get what you get. You get people fighting over who's the most racist and who can say the most outrageous shit. That's media now. We destroyed it. I tried to tell everyone, you can destroy this shit. You're not going to like what comes after. Well, welcome to what comes after. Khamzat, what 12 and also, if you're asking, like, for example, why do people at like UFC shows don't ask serious questions? They can't. They can't. I mean, they can, and then they just won't have that job for very much longer. Either the company will pull them off that job, or the UFC will make that outlet's job difficult to do, and then they just won't have it anymore. So, yeah. Khamzat went 12 for 17 on takedowns with 21 minutes of control time compared to Islam's 4-4 with 19 minutes. Weren't DDP and JDM equally ineffective, considering Jack didn't stuff a single takedown? Well, in terms of the wrestling, he was equally ineffective, sure. In terms of the other stuff, he was vastly more effective. Preventing the pass, or, again, to the extent, depending on the game he was playing, submission defense, making Islam have a much more difficult route to chase positions to the back, for example. He gave him a much harder fight. It may not show up all the way statistically based on our available tools, but on the eye test, it passes easily. What happened to the pipeline? We did this one already. Luke, because DJ and his co-host spoke so reverentially of you when you did his podcast, I can't help but think you two would have good chemistry if you ever worked together. Do you agree? I've never thought about it, but probably, I guess. Yeah, sure. I've never thought about it, but I mean, I think you saw that, you know. Luke, is Cobalt Red to the U.S. China what Heart of Darkness is to Belgium? Bizarre how detached we are from those outside of our tribe. Heart of Darkness, the Joseph Conrad story, I think is a little bit different, but they certainly have ominous parallels, and, you know, colonialism and resource extraction and what it does to native populations, both in terms of the ecosystem, to the labor itself, to the enrichment. I mean, yes, there are some parallels for sure. Seen any of the Adam Friedland show? No. He brought on people like Chris Cuomo and he presses them comedically. Highly recommend if you haven't checked it out. I haven't seen it. I saw you had Lena Khan on, but I haven't seen it. Thanksgiving is already about to happen. Is the Thomas family having any garbage bird turkey this year? My brother's cooking, and my brother and my sister, you might recall, used to own a restaurant. So I think we're going to have good food. I'm not too worried. What is the worst movie you've seen in a theater? Transformers 4 takes the cake for me. Almost 3 hours of agonizing noise and nonsense. The Trolls movie. I took my kid to see the Trolls movie. Luke, how do you feel about people that watch your stuff and may disagree with your political views? Fine. Do you feel like it's okay to have dissenting views but still enjoy your content? Sure. Guys, how many fighters' political views do I agree with? I still watch what they do. Now, granted, there's different realms, but nevertheless, it's not like disqualifying. I mean, in certain cases, I suppose it can be. But, as a general rule, no. Also, again, I think there's some people who would, but for me, would not hear some of these views. So I actually consider it to be a bonus. I mean, it creates some level of friction, but it's a bit of a bonus. All that Craig Jones camp is not working is crazy. JDM would have been submitted if it wasn't for Craig Jones. Yes, I agree. Do you think a wrestling heavy fighter like Armin would display Craig Jones' strategies better? Yes. Yes. Somebody was a little bit more able to scramble and could get to scrambling positions easier. Yes. 70% of Joe's comments are just mentioning a fighter's weight cut during a fight. It didn't used to be that way. This is what I mean. I think he's like grown a little bit disconnected from the game, even though his stature in the game is still as high as it's ever been. But, the ins and outs of being in the trenches of watching the sport and understanding the coming and the going and who's there, some of that has, I think, been eroded. Luke, I appreciate your work and point of view. At what point would prevalence of CTE in fighters be too much for you? In many ways, it already has. Have you ever heard Dylan's Who Killed Davey Moore a long time ago? I think about the implications of my fandom all the time and how it's kind of ugly. I think there are ways to do prize fighting more ethically. And that's why I advocate for those things. And it's why I advocate for pay. And it's why I advocate for, God, if I ever get the ear of somebody powerful, I'm going to tell them we have to completely reform the sanctioning system in this country. All of the people who are in power, not all of them, that's not true. Most of the people who are in power need to be thrown out. And the whole system has to be scrapped and redone. Yeah. Thoughts on Saagar? I always mispronounce his name. Saagar Enjeti. I like Saagar. I mean, I disagree with him on a lot. I think his anti-weed crusade to me is, there's a little bit of truth to it for sure, but it's largely oversold. However, I think that I think his instincts and about suspicion of power are right on the money. I think that he tries to think through problems as carefully as he can. I think that he does a wonderful show with Crystal Ball, Breaking Points. It's like my favorite show at this point, basically. He's knowledgeable. He's one of the conservatives that I follow on Twitter. Him, Charles Cook. I don't know if you would consider, he's more libertarian, but certainly Saagar is one of the guys I follow more closely. And not because I agree with him all the time, but because I think that he tries to, for the most part, with some exception, tries really hard to think through problems and really tries to get at them. And again, the guys who I'm going to trust the most are the ones who are going to be skeptical of power, even if it's on their own side. And he's shown plenty of that. Luke, do you think we will ever find out if JDM was hurt? Yes, but it could be years, depending. Or has Dana fans made it a lose-lose where fighters can't drop out or say they were hurt? They just have to be silent. It's more so the fan backlash than Dana White backlash. As a general immigration proponent, do you see the catastrophic failure of Western Europe that could emerge if you reduce selection standards? I don't know anything about European migration standards, policies, effects. It's not a thing I've studied at all. So I don't know what to say about that. I can only speak about ours and what our realities are, what we know about the data about this country, what we know about the habits of this country, what we know about the laws, what effect they've had. I can't speak for Europe. I think Europe has a different set of geographical demands, a different set of problems that they're going to have to encounter. They have a different economic model. I don't know anything about Europe, which is why I don't talk about it. I'm no expert, but I try to remain knowledgeable about immigration situations as it pertains to this one. So I don't make immigration arguments that are as equally portable from Jamestown, Virginia to Jakarta, I can't do that. But focusing on our problems and our data and our situation, I can get a bit of a more of a coherent worldview. Are black UFC athletes described differently by commentators? And if so, does that reveal deeper cultural biases in how black talent is framed? This is probably true across the board in sports. I don't think it's really a function merely of MMA. I think you get a lot of that across the way. And don't we have these large debates about what we say or do about black quarterbacks, for example? The idea that it wouldn't happen in MMA seems silly, but the idea that it would only happen in MMA seems silly. Not that the question's not an important question, but I'm saying it just seems much more ubiquitous across sports, Did you see the signed Yaroslav? Yes, the UFC signed Yaroslav Amosov. Should he get a top 10 fight? Yes, he should. Yes, he should. Very good fighter. Very skilled. Obviously at the end there, the Jason Jackson fight, it didn't go great, but he's still very good, and I really appreciate his talents, and we should take them seriously. All right, boys and girls, thank you so much for watching. I greatly appreciate it. MK tomorrow at 11. Luke, is there going to be a watch-along, a post-fight show for UFC Qatar? Yes, there is. Yes, there is. Yes, there's going to be. So be on the lookout for that. I'll have you covered on Saturday. I don't think I'm going to watch – I think there's going to be overlap between the Benavidez, Yard, and Haney-Norman fights. But anyway, certainly we're going to cover UFC on Saturday as well. So be on the lookout for that. All right? All right. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate everyone. We're out of here. Until next time, stay frosty. Bye.